I've been using the Fujifilm XH2s for just over 6 months on a daily basis for all my travel photography and videography. Originally it was a video only camera, however in recent months it's become both my main photo and video camera. And after a ton of daily use, I can finally share with you whether I think this camera is good or not and whether it's right for you. Without context, any camera review, in my opinion, is a little bit empty. I'm a full-time travel photographer with an emphasis on street photography, and I've been using Fujifilm cameras ever since 2018. However, in no way am I affiliated with Fujifilm, nor will I ever be. I bought this camera from a shop with my own money and paid exactly the same as what you would if you went to said shop and bought it with your own money today. I'm also not a Fujifilm fanboy. Matter of fact, I hated the XH1, and the first impressions of the XH2s were not actually that positive. Now, this is not a detailed gear review like you would see on other YouTube channels. I will not be telling you the exact type of plastic the joystick is made from and how it impacts autofocus performance at midnight. However, instead you will get a very holistic opinion of someone who uses this camera professionally to create these videos, all my photography, travel, and use on a daily basis as a tool. However, please remember, everything that I say is just my opinion. You might have a different one, and that's totally fine. And finally, if you're watching this video hoping that this camera will make you a better photographer or video maker, then it won't, because as great of a tool as this is, it's not going to make your photography better, nor is it going to make your videos any better. If you're buying this camera because you think it will do that, then may I suggest sticking to what you have, or maybe buying something cheaper, and instead spending quite a lot of money that this thing costs on putting yourself in front of interesting things to photograph, learning about light, and learning about composition. Let's start with build quality, and I think it's great. It feels solid, premium, and durable. If I needed a camera that could withstand a tough environment, this is the one I would go for. Overall, the body shows almost no signs of wear apart from the battery grip cover and the odd tiny corner mark. The screen is just as good as new with no extra play or movement. The buttons all still feel the same with no weird creaks or noises. Now, I have had a couple of crashes where the screen just turned purple, however a simple restart fix the issue. I've also had the camera freeze once or twice, and I had to take the battery out and put it back in to reset the camera, and then everything was fine afterwards. Now and again, I've had some issues with exposure hunting in the video if left on, let's say, auto exposure. However, since updating to the latest firmware, it seems to have resolved itself. I've also had some issues regarding audio levels, where you would set a certain audio level, you'll plug the mic in, or you'll turn the camera off, turn it back on, and then even though the same audio level is there, the volume itself was different, and this again seems to have been fixed with the latest firmware. Other than that, the camera has been incredibly reliable and, dare I say, the most reliable Fuji camera that I've owned to date. Coming from an XT camera, I initially didn't like the ergonomics of this. However, over time I found it more comfortable, especially when using with bigger lenses. When paired with the f1.4 primes, however, the overall balance of the camera felt perfect. The button placements are good if you have normal sized hands. Mine resemble that of a 10-year-old girl, so I do have to stretch the thumb to try and hit the joystick. However, over time, I just found a slightly different way of holding the camera and being able to reach the joystick quite easily. And ironically, I now prefer the XH2s joystick hand holding thumb thing over the XT5. This is the biggest area where I had to make a complete U-turn on my opinion. Initially, I wasn't a fan of this new layout. I much preferred the traditional setup of the XT cameras. However, over time, I've grown to love this new setup so much that I way prefer it over anything else that Fuji make at the moment, specifically because of how efficient and quick it is, and it has saved me so many shots. Let me give you a real world example. I'll be shooting in aperture priority, the shutter speed is high, and I'm getting the type of shots that I want. Let's say I see a car coming and I want to get a bit of a motion blur and a shutter drag. On an XT body, I would need to put the lens into auto. I would then need to set the shutter speed to what I need it to be, and then make sure everything aligns. Whereas with this camera, I can have a custom memory bank pre-programmed for a specific shutter drag, so I know most of the time I use 1/30th of a second. I literally flick it from one to the other and everything is set up exactly how I want it to be. So it's just more efficient. I can have another memory bank which is set up for, let's say, single point and spot metering. So I can go from a wide meter and a wide focus to a tight focus and a spot meter for more highlight shadow type images. I can have another memory bank set for low light photography. So if I'm going from being outside in a sunny day into a dark market, rather than changing a bunch of different settings, I just turn the dial from, I don't know, 3 to 4 and everything is set up. Now I will make a detailed and dedicated video to how I set up the XH2s. That will come in maybe a month or two. Another physical change is the removal of the focus switch that you would typically see on the bottom end of the camera, and instead it's now a custom button. This is a change that I personally prefer because the way I shoot is I just leave it in continuous autofocus and then I use focus lock to lock the focus if I need to. So for me, it's just made an extra custom button that I can use for something completely different. In this particular case, I will use it to digitally punch in zoom if I'm shooting in manual focus and see what's in focus or not. The top screen is extremely useful, especially when shooting from the hip. The fully articulating screen is great. Now, I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but personally, it doesn't bother me at all. And in some situations, I do prefer it over the new articulating or flip out screen, I forgot the names, of the XT5. The viewfinder is large and detailed. It's actually one of the best viewfinders I've used. And the overall performance of the camera is very good. Now, I'm not sure if the performance of the camera is down to the camera itself or it's down to the fact that it now uses a CF Express card, but even comparing to an XT5, which is again a newer camera if anything, you can tell a difference in performance, be it switching modes, be it switching the camera on and off, recording, all that kind of stuff. Now, it's not all great because there are quite a few quirks and issues when it comes to the usability of this camera. First of all, it's the button layout does not change depending on whether you're in photo or video mode. So when you set up all your custom buttons, you have to do it with both modes in mind, which is a bit silly considering most other hybrid cameras. When you switch from photo to video, how you've assigned your buttons also changes because, for example, certain video features are useless for photos and vice versa. The next annoying bug is that you can't assign ISO to one of the front or the rear index or thumb dials. And now you have to press the ISO button and then use the D-pad to select your ISO value. Every other Fuji camera, as far as I'm aware, you could just assign ISO to, let's say, the index dial, and then you can just turn it like a normal camera without going through this whole extra method and menu. Another issue is when you're shooting in auto ISO with the shutter speed and the aperture locked or pre-selected to whatever value that you want. On other Fuji cameras, you could still change the overall exposure and you can lock the exposure, which in this particular case is the auto ISO. On this camera, you can't. The only way you can change the overall exposure or lock the exposure is if you have either the aperture or the shutter speed in auto as well. Let me quickly pause now to plug my blog. Now, as many of you know, when I make these videos, I will first write out a script and then I will film the video just so that I don't chat shit, basically. These scripts are then turned into blogs and I publish them on my website. So if you prefer to read rather than to watch videos, then you can literally go and read all of my previous videos. On top of that, I prefer writing to filming, so there is actually more blogs online than there are videos. The latest blog I've just written is about all of my income streams and how I make a living effectively doing this. So I've linked that down below. And yeah, if you like reading, if you want to read about travel, photography, the business side of all of this kind of thing as well, then please go and check out my blog. It's all free. You don't have to sign up to anything. You don't have to do anything. Just go and read at your leisure. First of all, any differences in image quality are very hard to assess on a case-by-case basis, especially when comparing cameras from the same kind of generation or within a few years apart at least. If you take two identical photos, one on the XH2s and one that's on an XT3, put them side by side, and unless you pixel peep or really study the images for a long time, you'd be hard pressed to tell the difference. Also, assuming the overall exposure was good and you didn't have to do any crazy corrections or very high ISO images, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Now, even if you could tell a difference, putting both of these images here on YouTube, by the time that's all compressed, you'll definitely not tell any difference. With all that said, I can give you a high-level holistic overview of my opinion on the general image quality over thousands of photos and hours of video footage. And this opinion applies to both photo and video. There's definitely a boost in dynamic range. This is evident when shooting harsh, high contrast scenes or even shooting into the sun. Another thing I found is that both photos and videos have this very kind of soft cinematic feel to them. I don't know, again, if it's the extra dynamic range that's causing it, but generally, especially video footage, feels a lot softer, a lot more cinematic, and just generally more pleasant to look at and to work with. In terms of the files themselves, the raw files do have more latitude, and the video files also have a lot more room to edit, especially when shooting in F-Log2 like right now. So overall, there's definitely an improvement in image quality. I know it's very subjective, and it's something that you only really pick up once you've used the camera for a long time. But if you do want the best image out of a Fujifilm system, that's APS-C, in my opinion, this camera will give it to you. Autofocus is a huge improvement, and for the first time I can 100% rely on it. With previous cameras like the X-T4, I've always had this kind of worry that it would just start jumping around, so I would sometimes just leave it in manual focus and lock my face in, and that's about it. However, with this, I leave it on autofocus both for face tracking like right now, and even if I'm just shooting random things in the street. If I want to take a bit of B-roll of, I don't know, a table or whatever, I'll just point the camera, start recording, and very rarely, if ever, will the autofocus jump around. Overall, this is a great camera that, in my opinion, will be pretty much perfect once a lot of these quirks are ironed out, because most of them are software related. As the camera matures, the firmware will mature, so hopefully it'll become more reliable and these little issues will get fixed too. In my opinion, this camera is primarily suited to people who do both photo and video simultaneously. If you're mainly a photo person, perhaps the XH2 without the S could be a better option for you. Either way, these are professional level cameras that come at a professional level price. So they're definitely not suited for everyone, and I would never recommend spending this much money on a camera if you're going to be using it once a month for a trip to the seaside. If that's you, then an X-T4, even an X-T3 is going to be a better choice, especially for photography. However, if you plan on making money from your photography or video, if you want to take it more seriously, or if you have a very niche photography interest such as wildlife, which requires, let's say, the best of the best, then this camera is ideal within the Fuji system, and I have no issues recommending it to anyone in that category. Okay, I think I've covered just about everything. If I have missed something out, or if you have a very specific question, just leave it down in the comments. I'll do my best to get back to you. But other than that, that's it. Thank you ever so much for watching this video. Hope you are doing well, and have a good day. See you in a bit. Bye.